Good evening. We're back for Russ Silverstone's Safe Space podcast, part two of the interview with Alex Duchene, with my co-host Amanda Ducene. How you doing, guys?
Hi, how are you?
Very well, thank you, Amanda.
Good. Very good.
So when we left it last time, we'd just spoken about the birth of your first child. You have difficulty with your husband, and you're suffering from postnatal depression.
Yeah.
How far did you spiral out of control, from your perspective, not from anybody else's?
Far. Um, I remember a few things because that was another part of my life where like my dissociation kind of peaked. Um, I remember spending days where I would take care of my son in terms of his physical needs, but that was basically all that I was doing in terms of functioning as a human being. So I remember kind of waking up, taking care of him. He was a month old, 2 months old, whatever, putting him back in his crib, sitting at the kitchen table, and literally just zoning out for hours, like literally coming to, 3 hours later because he's crying, because he was an exemplar, like he was very out of the norm in terms of sleeping. Like he was sleeping through the nights after 2 weeks. Like I didn't have the sleepless nights. I wasn't the exhausted mom, he was,
That's a blessing.
yeah.
Yeah.
So he would, I would feed him, I would, bathe him, do whatever I needed to do. I would put him back in his crib and he would sleep for 3 hours. And I would literally sit there and go somewhere else, like in my mind, because I was in so much pain. Um, and I remember one day specifically, I'm going to cry. So in Jewish culture, in Jewish faith, when you're mourning someone, when you sit Shiva,
Yep.
I don't know if a lot of people still do this, but when I was growing up, it was still a thing that people did, especially, Sephardis that are extremely traditional, not necessarily religious, but very traditional.
Yep.
My grandmother used to do that when we would sit Shiva for someone. We would cover the mirrors.
Yeah. We did that too in our
Yeah.
family.
So I don't remember doing the covering part. I just remember that one day my husband came home and all the mirrors were covered and he asked me who died and I just looked at him and I said I did. Like I just remember that. I don't remember actually covering up, like going in and getting sheets and covering, like I don't remember doing that. Clearly I dissociate and did it, and my memories, I have a lot of those moments. And then I think the rock bottom was there was one day where I was sitting on my bed, I was breastfeeding my son, and I was in my head and I was in pain and I was crying and I went to a point where I think I was borderline on the verge of a psychosis of sorts mentally, because I dissociated so severely that I literally felt like I left my body and I was floating at the top of the room and I was watching myself. And that scared the shit out of me, because that's where I was like, okay, you're starting to lose grasp on reality. And I grabbed the phone and I almost called 911 to check myself in.
Yeah.
Did
Wow.
And
So sorry you felt that way.
yeah, like I literally was at that point where I was like, okay, this is getting dangerous. Like you're not well. Like you can't keep going like this because you have a child and this is not safe. Like even though I was that bad, like I was still able to kind of figure that part out. But yet I didn't make the phone call, and there was something in me that just said, because I've always taken care of myself, I was like, no, you got this. You got this. And that I think was my rock bottom. That day was my rock bottom. Like the next day I kind of snapped into action where I was like, okay, you need to
How
get
did your husband react when you said that to him? Did he have a big reaction, no reaction, or
I mean, I don't really remember, but based on what I know of how he was at the time and his personality, probably no reaction. He probably just kind of, laughed it off and went on about his day kind of thing. Um,
okay.
that's what I kind of think happened.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was dark, but it was also like that it changed. Like that was the first big shift in my life where after when I got out of wherever I was in at that point in my life, like the other side of this, I was a changed person. That was like the first steps of me kind of starting my healing journey from my trauma, basically, was that.
Was it an
Okay.
identity of just being yourself, or the identity of being yourself and a mother that pulled you through this?
Well, I think it's the years that followed where, there was a 5 or 6 year period after that where I was single before I met my second husband. And I'm a loner, so I really used that time. I spent a lot of time alone, figuring myself out, growing, healing, and finding myself because I had no idea who the fuck I was. I had no idea who I was without my trauma. Like it was, yeah, I didn't know who I was. So I spent the following few years figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, my career, my art. That's another thing. Like, being an artist is such a big part of who I am. How do I make that work? Um,
Do you
and
find art healing too? Does your art, or do you channel your pain into your art, or does your art,
tremendously, yeah,
yeah,
always, 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 always. It's funny because when I look at my art personally, like, other people won't know, but when I look at my art and I know when I made the art, most of my best work was done around the times in my life where there was something big going on, like not necessarily traumatic, but like big changes in my life. I did a lot
that's
of
how it came out?
work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Did faith play any part at all in your recovery?
Um, I wouldn't say faith in the traditional sense of the word. I'm not a religious person, but I am highly spiritual. I do believe that there's a lot to the world that we don't see a lot more than we think.
Yep.
And if we think that we're in control of it all, like, no, we're fooling ourselves because
Yeah.
we're not. I do believe that. But I think faith in the sense that I have something that I have started to refer to as radical optimism and radical, what's the word I'm looking for? I I've always had, I can't explain it, I can't describe it, but I've always had this intense feeling like, I mean, now people call it manifesting. It's become,
Yeah.
that's the trend now.
Yeah. The
But
go-to
before,
word.
but before manifesting was a thing,
Yeah.
that's kind of how I felt. I've always felt like nothing is out of reach. Like, if that's what you want, then do it. Just do it. But, and people get stuck on like, but how, and what, and this. Just, you don't have to have all the answers. Just start walking in that direction. Like, I have this radical faith that if you do good, if you live your life with integrity, if you bust your ass, you go after your dreams, you believe in all that is good, and you live your life every day according to that, shit happens. And I've seen it in my own life. My entire life is a perfect example of that. So that's faith to me, I guess.
What was your biggest step then? Once you'd actually decided this is what I'm going to do, what was it you actually chose to do? Was it going back to school?
There was a moment, actually, I was in California. So I always wanted to be an artist, always, but I was raised with, oh, you don't make a living being an artist and yada, yada, yada. My mom was a bully. I was an A student. And when I got to college, she's like, no, you're going to go in science. So I went in science and I did chemistry, I did advanced physics, I did quantum physics, I did advanced calculus. Like I did all of that because they wanted me to go to university and be an engineer or a doctor, one of those things. Uh, I ended up getting into university in sociology because I was very interested in sociology and anthropology. And as much as I was an A student in high school, I really messed up in college and I ended up not having the grades to get into,
Yeah.
medicine or whatever. Um, and then a few years later, after I had dropped out of university, I had started working in advertising. And graphic design was very different back then than what it is now. Graphic design was still at its very infancy. It was not something that you go to university for. It was a trade.
Yeah.
It was
Okay.
graphic design was something that was born as a result of the printing, when printing was born, then they started making a lot of it also has to do with activism when they started needing to do posters for things like, like social movements in the streets and so they needed graphic design. They needed someone to actually like lay out the type. People that would lay
Okay.
out the type that was the infancy of graphic design. Anyways, all this to say that I discovered graphic design. I got a job in an advertising agency and I discovered graphic design and I was like, okay, this could maybe be a way for me to be creative and also make a living.
Yeah.
And then, but then there was like, okay, but how do you learn and what do you do? And, I was like, I couldn't wrap my head around like, okay, how am I going to make this happen? At the time I was I was working in advertising to put my first husband, he was in university, so we were one income couple, basically. We were
Mm.
planning our wedding, all our money was going into that. So I was like, how to, and so that didn't happen for a few years. And then when I got single, I met someone who lived in California. I went to visit him in California. And I didn't love certain aspects of California, but then one day I found myself in a coffee shop and everybody around me was my age or younger. And they were all talking about, I have an audition, I have this, I have that. And all artists, all creatives, they were all chasing their dream. And that inspired the shit out of me because I'm like, I'm not less talented or less smart than these people are. The only difference is that they believe that they can achieve what they want to achieve. And so I went home after that trip and I decided that I was going to start freelancing as a graphic artist and just learn on the fly. And so I
Well,
started taking contracts, not fully knowing what the fuck I was doing. It was a very much like just say yes and you'll figure it out. People would start asking, do you know how to do it? Was the infancy of websites. They were like, do you know how to do it? Yeah, I know how to do websites. And then I would stay up all night, like watching, like YouTube videos or whatever, like tutorials on how to figure out HTML. And I just learned and I just started. And from then on, it was just this 20-year process of getting more and more healthy mentally, having more faith in myself. Um, and the better I got at it, the more I was like, I became kind of fearless because I had gone through such difficult stuff in my life that there was there's very little that scares me at this point. I mean,
How was
yeah.
motherhood at that time?
I loved it. I loved being a mom. Uh, I'm very good at it.
Good.
It
Glad to
was,
hear.
I don't know how to say it. I found myself in that as well. I've always been, I'm a very hands-on, like not helicopter mom hands-on kind of thing, but hands-on in the sense that when I'm with my kids, I really make a very conscious effort to be very present. I'm silly with my kids. I'm goofy with them. I'm adventurous with them, and yeah, I loved it. I grew from being a mom a lot. My kids have taught me a lot of things. They've taught me patience. I was not a patient person. Being a mom has taught me patience because you have to be. Um, yeah, it's been wonderful. I love being a mom. I love it. I've loved everything about it.
How have you managed to navigate becoming a mum the second time? What was the gap between your two boys?
So they're 13 years apart.
Also, quite a big gap then.
Yeah, which was very interesting. Because when Liam was little, he wanted a sibling. And then when he reached age 7, 8 years old, he flipped. All of a sudden, he was very happy being an only child. We had a really, really special bond. It's the age where you start doing more interesting stuff. And I was very active with him. So every weekend that he was with me, one weekend out of two that he was with me, I had split custody when, at the time with my first ex, we would go on adventures, it's like every weekend, it's like, okay, we're going to this thing, we're going to do this thing, we're seeing this movie, we're going to a theater, whatever. Um, and he loved the one-on-one thing. And then, when I met my second husband, we moved to Toronto. He then had a relationship with my second husband as his stepdad, and I think he started to warm up to the idea of having a sibling. Um, and we really didn't know what to expect of it, but I instinctively kind of also just assumed because of the way that I was raised and the way I was raising my kids that I didn't know how close they would be, but I knew that there would be a lot of love there. And it was exactly that. Like Liam was extremely protective of his little brother. They were close, they still are. It's incredible.
You take great pleasure in your sons.
Yeah. I just, I'm watching them and like they're both turning into these just really amazing human beings. And I just like I look at them and I'm like, I did that. And I giggle. Like, like I get so much joy. Because they're awesome. They're really awesome people. And it's not like, sometimes I'm like, oh, okay, obviously I think they're awesome because they're my kids. But then, a lot of people will meet Liam or Izzy and they'll come to me and they'll be like, dude, like your kid is really special. And I'm just like, you know,
Breaking
like
the
I
mo-
said,
breaking the mold is something really important when you've had a difficult childhood. Did it help repair your relationship with your parents?
no, I thought it would. Um, Unfortunately, it didn't. Um, I was really, really, I was really sorry. I'm getting some text and it's distracting me. I was really, really hoping that it was going to do that. Um, but after a point, I realized that it wasn't. And with my mom, um, things just got progressively bad to a point where I cut out my relationship with her a few years ago. And with my dad, I mean. A little bit in the sense that with my dad, it didn't help my relationship with him, but it helped him in the sense that he had lost his son, my brother, who I met 8 years ago. Long story. That's a whole other story. And so me having he had a very special bond with Liam, with my older son. They spent a lot of time together. They would watch movies together. My dad taught him about the Holocaust, like all that stuff. They'd watch war documentaries together when he was little, like it was.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it healed not all of it, but a little bit of that massive open wound that he had because of his son. So I think it did help him definitely, but it didn't really change anything to our relationship, unfortunately.
He didn't talk to you about it ever? Or were there ever any conversations after you had your kids about?
There was always this in dialogue, this like, oh, we're gonna do this, like this. He wanted to do more, oh, I want to do this with Liam, but it was words, like it would never, the effort was never there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The effort was never there. So it was like, yeah, when we get together and when he would see Liam like later, and after when we moved, I'm like, we're jumping in the conversation. So sometimes like in my mind, I'm a little bit blurred in terms of
Mhm.
the timing, but like for a while we were all living in the same house, but when we moved out and it had to, there was an effort that had to be put in terms of like seeing him. I think again, I was healing, but my mom and my sister were still at the time very much dealing with their own hell. I was, in my healing process, then I moved to Toronto and I was progressing in my own, and they were still very much living their own personal hell and trying to keep their heads above water. So I don't think they had a lot of energy to unfortunately maintain certain, so they love my son. They love both my sons, but there wasn't the level of closeness that I would have liked to be there.
How did the conversation you just brushed upon about your father's son? Can we speak about that?
Yes. So growing up, we always knew that I refer to him as my brother, but technically he's a half brother. He's my dad's biological son. Um, my dad moved to Canada in 64. He met someone here when he moved here. She was she was 19. She was a few years younger than he was. And she came from a very prominent French Canadian family, and she got pregnant. And at the time, this was the 60s in Quebec. Um, they sent her away to have the child because it was out of wedlock.
Yeah.
And then as soon as the day that she gave birth, they basically ripped the child out of her arms and put the baby in an orphanage. My dad, and at the time this was in the 60s, so there was no like rights for the dad. Like it was the mom resigned like the rights to the kid. It was just like dads didn't really have any rights. So my dad then went to court for like 2 years to get custody of his son, which he did. He finally got,
Respect.
yeah, he finally got
Yeah.
custody of his son after 2 or 3 years. And then he met my mom. And things went wrong. Now, growing up, the story that we were told, it was not a pretty story, but it was the story that we lived with, was that when my dad got custody of my brother, he was a difficult kid, had a lot of emotional, behavioral issues. He was very behind from a developmental point of view, and it was too much, and they put him up for adoption. That's the story that we grew up with. And then throughout the first, 20 years of my life, there were periods of us kind of finding out where he was living and so this was really fucked up. So,
Yeah.
when in 1983, when I was 8 years old, we bought the big house in the suburbs. and we moved to Laval, which is a suburb of Montreal. And shortly after moving there, we found out through a cousin who had a friend who was a counselor at B'nai B'rith camp,
Oh, wow.
who ended up becoming friends with my brother, who was also a counselor at B'nai B'rith camp.
Oh,
And
wow.
found out that he lived literally a few blocks away from our house. And so
That's
I spent a
wild.
lot, yeah, I spent a lot of my teenage years. I'd get into a fight with my mom. I'd get on my bike and I would go ride my bike and see if I could catch a glimpse of my brother. And I never did. And my sister saw him and my dad saw him. And there was like attempts to make contact with him, but it never really worked out. And then Facebook, 2007, Facebook came about. And the first thing I did when I got on Facebook was like, I'm going to look for him. And I found him. I had his name and I had his birthday, and he has a very unique birthday because he's born on February 29th of a leap year.
Oh, not
Okay.
many of those people about, is there
There's
really?
not a lot of them. So when I
Yeah.
found the profile, his picture wasn't very telling because it was dark and you couldn't really tell his face very well. But the name with the matching birth date, I just knew that it was him. And so I sent him I sent him a friend's request and I sent him a message telling him who I was. I'm like, I'm your biological half sister. Um, I have no interest in like rekindling anything that's never been there to begin with, but I'm really curious to know who you are. And if you ever have any interest, you know where to find me. And he accepted my friend's request, but he never messaged me back. And I just waited. And I waited and I waited and I waited. And Halloween, I'm shaking telling you this story. I'm shaking. Seriously, like my hands are shaking. Can I smoke?
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course, yeah. Yeah,
I'm literally
we're weed
shaking
friendly.
as I'm telling you this because it's so intense, because it's such a big part of my story. Um, this is Halloween 2017, and Izzy is 3 years old, and we're trick-or-treating. And it's like he's 3 years old. He's wearing a little duckling costume, the cutest thing in the world,
Of
and
course.
he's like going around and running around, and we're watching him like we're so excited because it's like his, I think it was like his second Halloween because the first year he was what we didn't do
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
And then the second, so it's what I think it was his first or second Halloween, and we're all excited. And my phone's in my pocket and my phone buzzes. I get like a vibrating notification and I look at my phone and it's a Facebook notification and it's Happy Halloween from Eric and the last name. And I literally almost dropped my phone. I went into full like palpitations. I was like, holy fuck.
Yeah.
And I literally I stopped and I was looking at my phone and I was freaking out and I didn't know what to do. And my ex-husband looked at me and he's like, what's going on? And I just showed him the phone and he looked at me and he's like, just go, just go, go. Like he knew immediately. He was like, just go and just go deal with it.
Yeah.
I'm finished the trick-or-treating, just go. And I messaged him back. I'm like, can we talk? He's like, sure, like not on the phone, but like, he's like, yeah, we can chat. He wasn't open to having a phone call immediately. So I'm like, I'm heading home right now. And for the next 3 days, I brought my sister into the conversation after, like, we exchanged a bit. So this was actually really interesting. He didn't know there was two of us.
Oh,
So my sister and him were actually siblings for 2 years. They lived together, and like my sister was born 2 years after he left us,
Okay.
roughly. So he had memories, like he knew that he had a sister or a
Oh,
sibling. And
okay.
so when he reached out to me, he thought I was that baby.
Hmm.
So the first 3 days we started to talk, And then there were things that he said that made me understand. Like, I think at some point he called me Sophie. Something happened that made me realize that, oh shit, he thinks I'm my sister.
Yeah.
And I said, dude, I'm like, do you know that there's two of us? Like, the baby that you remember is not me, it's my sister. There's two of us. And then he was like, oh shit, I didn't know. So then I brought my sister into the conversation. Um, and it was like a few days of us just exchanging messages and kind of piecing a little bit of the story together. There were some really interesting moments because he was adopted at 7.
What a difficult age as well to be adopted at.
Yeah. You're
Yeah,
already.
Mm.
yeah. And so when he was adopted, that's when like the story, like sorry, the pictures that he has of himself begin. He had never seen a picture of himself before the
Wow.
age of 7. Me and my sister have pictures of him as a baby. And so it was a very, very surreal, like Black Mirror episode where you're talking to this stranger that looks exactly like you because we look a lot alike. He's a carbon copy of my dad, actually. Um, and then you're producing to this person a picture of themselves as a baby that
Wow.
they've never seen.
Yeah. Wow.
So there were a lot of those moments that were really fucked up, like mind bending, surreal. And then there were moments of when reality hit where, for example,
Take your
there's a
time.
picture, there's a picture that me and my sister had seen multiple times before. And it's a picture of my sister as an infant. She's, I don't know, maybe 6 or 8 months old in a baby chair of sorts, like she's plopped up kind of thing. And my brother Eric is standing next to her. And like this is a picture from the 70s. He's wearing like a brown, the
Big
pointy
colours.
collar kind of
Yeah.
shirt. Polyester kind of thing, button down, like the 3 buttons and like um, and we had seen that picture, I mean, dozens of times before. And I had that picture scanned on my computer and I sent it to him. And the first thing he says is, look at the bruise on my cheek. I had never even seen it.
Didn't
And
even pick up
that's, and no, and yet that's the first thing that he saw because he
on.
was
Wow.
brutally abused. And so I think it was a week later, like after 5 or 6 days of talking, I just said to him, I'm like, listen, I don't know what happens next, but we need to meet in person. Like we absolutely, like the three of us need to absolutely meet in person. And
Yeah.
so I booked myself a flight and I went up to Montreal and the three of us met. Um, it was incredibly surreal because I had imagined that moment in my head thousands of times before. Um, and that's when we found out the truth of what really happened, which was that my brother was viciously abused by my mother. And he was taken out of my family by Child Protective Services.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It must have been absolutely horrific back then for that to have actually happened.
Yeah.
As we spoke about previously, parents got away with certain things when we were growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what did happen is that, my sister was born. She slipped through, like, because like today they would have taken my sister too.
Holy fuck, they would have done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
so like, my sister and I talk about it today. We're like, wow, like they could have come and taken you, but that didn't happen. But, my brother's sister, like from his adoptive family, like she has all the paperwork. She's like, they had a file like this on your mom. Like
Oh
the
my
abuse
God.
How
vicious.
fucking lucky were you and your
Yeah.
Yeah.
sister? I mean, I'm sorry for your brother, but how lucky were you and your sister?
Yeah, but
Yeah.
that's why it became so here's the fucked up. This is where there was a year, the year after we met my brother, my sister and I kind of like went really back into our trauma because all of a sudden a lot of things, like a lot of pieces that didn't make sense started to fall into place. Like I remember being a kid.
I actually got goosebumps, by the way, for what you
Yeah.
just said then.
Yeah. I remember being a kid and hearing my mom, like, because I remember I told you that when we were very young, there were very few instances of physical abuse.
Yeah.
I remember my mom when I was really young, and my sister, we talked about that because I was like, Sophie, am I imagining this or did we hear them say? She's like, no, we heard them. She's like, I remember this too. So sometimes her and I, like, we kind of bounce things off each other because we're like, am I imagining? Sometimes like you're with trauma, like memories that go back that far, sometimes you're wondering, like, did I imagine it or did it really
Yeah.
happen?
Yeah.
So her and I sometimes have to like check with each other, like, did this really happen? Like, can you confirm? And when we were really young, like we would hear my mom tell my dad, we can't hit them, it leaves marks. And that's why the abuse turned mental it was simply so she could protect herself and not get caught.
For the
So
second time, to get
with me
caught
and
for
my
a second
Wow.
time,
and my
wouldn't it?
sister, for me and my
Yeah.
sister, basically.
Yeah.
So the level of abuse that we endured mentally was, at par. But again,
For sure.
there was no
Yeah.
physical marks,
Yeah.
my brother would get locked into a closet for 3 days at a time with no food and nothing, whatever. You know,
Fuck me,
we
man.
would we would get, we got held hostage at knife point. She stabbed. So I'll give you an example of one of the, like, just to give you an example of one of the levels. My sister and I still talk about it. She's, once in a while she'll be like, "Oh, you want to talk about the turtle?" So, um, my sister and I, we love animals, both of us. And so, we had different